Welcome to the CMMC Proof Podcast. I'm your host, Derrich Phillips, a certified CMMC assessor. And today is a great day because I have Tammie McClellan joining us. She is a deputy CISO at the University of Central Florida. How are you, Tammie?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the podcast. You have a cool office. I like all the accolades on the wall back there.
I've been here quite a while. In fact, in a little over a week, I'll have been here for 31 years. So I have collected quite a few mentos and accolades. So thank you.
You're a great place to work to keep you there that long.
I love UCF for sure.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about your role at UCF.
Sure. The current role that I'm in as Deputy CISO for Research Cyber Risk Management is really a new unit under the Information Security Office. And it brings together the administrative side of compliance, the reviews of contracts, agreement terms, to include personnel screening and training, compliance documentation, with the secure operations of UCF Secure Enclave that we refer to as Night Shield.
Yep. We're going to talk a lot more about Night Shield. Before we dive into the cybersecurity compliance nuances, what do you like to do for fun outside of work?
What I like to do for fun? Well, I'm a bit of a DIYer. I like to work with wood tools and make things. I've renovated kitchens. I've taken apart an old entertainment center and put it back together in a new way. Painting, all sorts of things like that. I like to stay busy and do non-computer things on the weekend.
That's good. So as far as being a DIY, but it kind of ties into building a cybersecurity program.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, on this podcast, we focus a lot on just the cybersecurity compliance and specifically CMMC. What's been your experience with CMMC compliance?
Well, I kind of evolved into this role and position historically. 31 years that I've been here has been focused on developing various systems for the Department of Defense. I've worked with every branch of the Armed Services to include the Office Under Secretary of Defense. And many of those systems that our team was developing, we ended up operating as a federal information system under FISMA. So we've gained a lot of experience in that world. And, following NIST 800-53, we've been through the ATO process many times, annual assessments, cyber command inspections. So when, not really CMMC, but it was really more the DFAR 7012 clause came out with requirements to meet NIST 800-171, it was the director of the institute that I was working at who asked my team to develop a compliant environment, right, for our research to take place in. That environment then basically evolved to support all of campus, rather than individual labs, trying to achieve compliance requirements on their own. We were asked to take that on. And then just a few years ago, I got involved with the Office of Research and became their interim director for cyber risk management. And that really kind of, enlightened me on the administrative side of what was going on. That's kind of been more my focus, I'd say, in the past couple of years is, trying to get a handle on, streamlining business procedures and implementing new policies so that we can be better prepared when CMMC becomes official to then be certified. So yeah, everything from, ancillary reviews of contracts and, seeing some of the not so clear language. There's a lot of back and forth trying to seek clarification, especially in the university realm. Oftentimes, I would say proposals can end up being morphed into the statement of work, right? And then they add some contractual terms on it and throw in some regulations, but you don't always end up with clear-cut scenarios that you would expect to see, at least from the language that's out there of your deliverables, will be marked this way, and things kind of evolve in our space. And so trying to get a better handle, maybe a workflow or decision tree that we can follow has really been primary focus for us because it is not clear cut in the research area. What aspects are CUI, what aspects are not, and how can we kind of carve things out so that we don't increase scope? We can narrow that, especially when you consider a lot of our labs have specialized equipment and it is also shared equipment. So we can't really bring all of that into the secure enclave realm and still allow undergrad student research and other other activities to go on without complexities.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. Now, as far as the type of research that's taking place at the UCF, what is anything you can talk about at a high level, the type of research?
Sure, yeah. Really proud of the research going on at UCF. We're premier for engineering and technology. That is the primary focus, I would say, then for DoD research, right? And a lot of that centers around modeling and simulation, development of digital twins, lasers, optics and photonics, hypersonic propulsion. We kind of run the gamut under the engineering spectrum. And so there's published articles about that. There's nothing that I said is, restricted in the sense of the type of research that goes on here. But yeah, many of our researchers are nationally renowned for what they do. And it's wonderful that they're here at UCF.
Oh, keep you busy.
Yes, they do. Yeah, we have more than one project in our secure enclave. So we do stay busy.
I can imagine. Our mutual friend, Wendy Epley, I had her on the podcast and she's like, you have to talk to Tammie from UCF. She's doing some great things in that space. So I'm sure she was referring to Night Shield. So tell us more about Night Shield and what makes it unique and what successes have you all experienced?
Yeah, because of, I'd say maybe the nature of, the type of research that we do. And you clearly glean from what I just described, being more in the export control area, it's really critical that we provide an environment for our researchers to kind of move into, take the burden off of them. And so Night Shield represents that, and it is supported at the core level by the university. There are nuances or, unique aspects for specific projects, then they have to cover that under their contract. But for the most part, the operations and the core licensing for Night Shield is covered by the university. We are extending into the cloud so that, we can quickly pivot when a new project comes on board. Maybe we don't have on-prem resources to be able to support it. And so having that in cloud allows us to do that. So we're a hybrid environment, but we are completely separate from the rest of the campus enterprise domain. We're a separate environment. We work hand in hand with the researchers in the sense that we're getting them onboarded into the environment. We're either handling their physical system or establishing a VDI for them. We help them with the compliance documentation as well. And really in their areas, they have to cover the physical controls or, unique procedures around their lab. In fact, one of your questions when you asked earlier about CMMC, it was kind of surprising perhaps that some of those one-point controls that can't be POAM'd, right, are really centered around the physical realm of protecting CUI. So visitor control, physical security logs, even external connections, what's going on with those systems. And a lot of that centers around what is occurring within the labs and offices, where CUI is being conducted and handled. Right. So, we're evolving Night Shield to be able to handle, the types of research that UCF has. And that kind of goes hand in hand with monitoring CMMC, right? As we're evolving and moving into the cloud space, we got to continually update documentation and policies of, how we want things to work and also be compliant.
Right. It's always that balance. Certain.
And can we finish doing all the documentation, before it's actually time to be certified? But we're there. We're getting there.
We're definitely a work in progress, continuous, ongoing effort. Absolutely.
Now, it's growing pains, right? So you start to tweak one area and then you got to loop back around and make sure everything aligns to that. So
yeah, and I feel the pain because Aspire Cyber, we're a candidate C3PO. We're preparing for our CMMC Level 2 assessment. It's a different experience going through it as your organization preparing versus me as a consultant comparing an organization, telling them what to do, but not having to do everything.
Well, the thing is, it's not a one and done. It never is. And that's why I mean as we're evolving and taking on each individual research project, as well as kind of changing what the enclave can support and can provide to researchers. We are changing. We don't just set it up and forget it. And so constantly then going back and making sure that everything now aligns to some of these adjustments that we're making to support that growth is, I guess, a pain, but it's a necessary evil.
The labor of love.
Yes, exactly.
The biggest challenge I've experienced as a consultant and as preparing for our assessment is it's a culture shift. That's really the toughest part, where you're really changing the way you operate, context of what's in scope for CMMC or any other regulations.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll continue to do, more training in those areas, as we go. Fortunately, we have kind of a set group of, researchers that do this. And so they get one project after the next. So they're kind of already familiar after we've had some initial discussions. It's not constantly always new teams, right, that are coming on board. But honestly, they play a critical role in a university, getting certified, right? Because we have to anticipate that their lab is going to be visited. And so they always got to be on their game and make sure that they're following all of those procedures. So that's kind of a continuous effort as well to make sure that we're doing those monitoring, sessions, assessments, following up, and just kind of checking that they're aware of what needs to be done and they're making sure that they're constantly on par with that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So out of curiosity, does UCF do any research that falls into the classified realm?
We do have some contracts that do that. We're a cleared facility for that. But most of that is happening at sponsor locations.
Okay. Now, you mentioned having experience with ATOs and 800-53. Have you found it easier since 800-171 just a subset of 800-53? Have you found that experience has helped or made things a little easier? Or do you consider it kind of just a different experience, the ATO process versus CMMC?
I would say I found it similar but different. I mean, They stem from that card catalog, but the difference is going through an ATO process, you have a very rigid maybe checklist, right? Or what you're expected to follow based on the ISSO, the Information System Security Officer, or the Information Assurance Manager. What are they expecting? What are they looking for? And so I feel in some regards we're missing that with 800-171 because that's kind of like all open and to be defined, which in some ways is a blessing, right? Because you don't want everything to be dictated to you. But at the same time, when you're talking about being certified, you don't know if there's a different expectation than what you might be choosing to do for an organizationally defined parameter. Under 800-53, though, whoever that cognizant agency is that you're supporting, they've already defined it. You know what it is that you have to meet. There's no guessing around that. There's no guessing around the documentation that you're going to be having to provide, and it's being cataloged and organized in like EMOS, for example, right? And under the 800-171 or CMMC, it just is a lot looser. Maybe some of these details will start to be better defined as the certification part of CMMC rolls out, but just leading into that, it doesn't have the same rigidness maybe, we would be looking for of how do we get there. And I don't think it's, you want an exactly defined checklist. I just think there's too many things that are sort of open for interpretation, and especially in the research realm when it's not just really one business that we are securing or one facility. We have many buildings, many labs that have these types of activities going on, and we're trying to accommodate each of them in their unique aspects to perform research and still be compliant. So we're always trying to look at that and make sure that we're achieving compliance, but we're also allowing the research to be conducted that we were hired to do.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I totally agree. With 800-171, with the context of CMMC certification, there's so many gray areas, and those gray areas can be very expensive when you're purchasing solutions or making interpretations, and you just don't know how the assessors are going to basically receive your interpretations. So
even, looking at the rule that will be final, hopefully October, November, I felt it was a little bit of scope creep. There was some predictability in there of what we expected the rule to have, but adding in new terms like security protection data or defining around security protection assets and securing all of those the same way we would CUI. Well, that wasn't previously a requirement, but now it's kind of a line that's been drawn that it's this expectation, but there's no additional funding that's coming, right, to move something that may not have been inside of the same enclave or the same scope that you had before. So yeah, it was little eye-opening of some of that. I also kind of felt there was a lot of chicken and egg scenarios. If you read through that, of your external service provider has to be certified. Okay, well, does that happen before, during? How does that affect us being certified? Same thing when you look at the relationship between prime and subs, right? So now under the CMMC program, the prime is fully responsible for the entire supply chain. Well, what exactly does that mean? We are doing the verifications that are required under the DFARS, but what additional steps or levels are going to be expected when we as the university serve as the prime versus being a sub to one of the larger contractors within the DIB? Maybe we have something to learn from all of them. I don't know, but seeing how the rollout plan is probably going to hit some of those, larger companies, Lockheed and SAIC, Leidos, some of those that are big in the defense industrial base space. But if you look at it, it says that your subs have to be certified at the level that you are. So that's, again, one of those chicken and the egg scenarios of what is the right timing, for a university to be certified, and when will that actually hit us and affect us. I felt like some of that wasn't well defined and left some questions, but we'll see as things evolve.
Yeah, I'm hopeful they clarify those questions, because to your point, like with security protection assets and external service providers, those are major shifts from the way things have currently been done, and organizations have to make significant investments if the DoD pretty much holds that line and say, okay, yeah, there's no small undertaking.
Yeah, but in their words, this whole program is really just to assess and verify that you're meeting 800-171, where that was never defined. Right. You were to basically address CUI assets and where that data was, and security protection data. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be secured, but it didn't fall under the same realm requirements that CUI did. But now this has kind of evolved into something new, but there's no additional funding that's coming with it.
Right. And even with the FedRAMP moderate equivalent, the DoD memo kind of defined that. Still a lot of gray areas there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've kind of started creating our own checklist, right? So as we're going to procure something, do we have this? Do we have the right language in the contract that we have with that vendor for purchasing? But this whole thing of equivalency, it's like, well, they might as well already be on the list to become FedRAMP moderate, because, it's the same outline. But I thought the timing of that memo was interesting with the release of CMMC's final rule. So.
There's a lot to be determined. Indeed. So we do know that last month, the DoD submitted the final rule, CMMC final rule, to OIRA. What are your thoughts about that, as far as how quickly they adjudicated all of the comments that they received on the proposed rule?
Yeah, I think that was kind of expected. The length of the rule being 230 some pages long, right? It already included a lot of the comments from the previous, initial rule, I guess you could say. Right. So they were already trying to quantify their stance and position. So it was really anything that came in that wasn't already addressed by that. So I already felt like they were on the fast train just because they front loaded all of their feedback, their view. So in some ways, I'm kind of glad, the longer things go on, the more room that it leaves for uncertainty and decision making, right? Because universities are on a fiscal year, right? We've got a budget and plan, and the longer that things stretch out, it becomes challenging of, do we need to include funding for doing the certification now? Do we wait? Is that, another 9 months from now? Where is that at? Because we're held to, that's our amount. And the program that, we have, and it becomes difficult when you can't really answer whether it's this year or next year. In some ways, I think it's also good because some folks were wondering, was this ever going to happen? So it's like, oh, look, there's movement, it's occurring. So
yeah, definitely. Because to your point, that uncertainty it comes at a cost and trade-offs where people just not believing it's not either ever going to happen, or at the same time, when we see, for example, with whistleblower cases related to CM or related to 80171 compliance, if there's still so much uncertainty, it's like, how do you really hold people accountable for that? I understand DoD's standpoint where they say, okay, defense contractors should have already been pretty much implemented 80171, but there's still so much left open to the interpretation. So it's like, okay, they may have, from their standpoint, from a self-assessment standpoint, they may think, hey, we've been doing it right, but they don't know. It's a lot of subjectivity that needs to be cleared up sooner than later.
Exactly.
Hoping that's the case with the new rule. Now, going back to Night Shield, you mentioned the importance of streamlining the compliance activities and also reducing the burden on, I would imagine, the researchers. Why is that so important, just reducing that burden on researchers?
The focus for them is what they were hired to do, basically, right? They want to get on with getting on. And in fact, as soon as the award is signed, they're usually already have meetings lined up, right? Kickoff meeting, usually in the first couple of weeks. Well, wait a minute. Is that meeting going to discuss CUI, right? And when you look at having a separate enclave, if they don't have access to a VDI or a system that is meeting NIST 800-171, well, then they can't use the existing system that they have, right? And in a lot of cases, especially with undergraduate research, they might not even have an allocated system. They might have a personal system, that they had been using, right? So it's really important to quickly engage with the principal investigator and identify, do you need systems? Does everyone have, either a system already part of Night Shield, or can we quickly then provision you a VDI so that you're performing that work within, the enclave? I guess the other aspect is they have their own deadlines. They have their own schedule that really never factored in compliance. When I made the comment earlier that oftentimes, a proposal is written and then it gets morphed into being the statement of work. They've already mapped out their phases, right, of the research. And that does not involve getting into an enclave or acquiring a compliant system. And so sometimes, this hits them and they're like, oh, I had no idea that I couldn't just use this custom made, system that we went and got parts from Best Buy or whatever, right? And it's like, well, we've got to, be able to kind of help you maintain that and meet, certain secure configuration settings. So it's engaging with them early and often so that they're now aware. Many that do this type of research, let's say it's export controlled, they've been doing that kind of research for a very long time.
Right.
But they don't know that the rules now are a little different, right? You can't just, keep it restricted by password or, there's a whole new laundry list, of items that you have to meet. And so we've had to kind of break some of that barrier. And you talked about the cultural, differences or bringing people along. They're certainly willing, but because they hadn't known about it, they hadn't yet factored it into their thinking because they've always done it this way.
Right.
Then we've got to make sure that we can get in and get out, right? That we can do things quickly so as not to impede them from doing what they need to do on the timeline that's been defined with their sponsor. Unfortunately, I don't feel that a lot of, government contract officers, program managers are trained yet at the same level that I would say even university administrators are having to be trained in order to meet these, regulatory requirements. Because when we go back and we ask questions, they're like, well, just follow what the clause says. And it's like, okay, well, that doesn't give us any more information than what we'd already known. So we're looking for, a little bit more clarity here. Do any of these deliverables have these types of requirements? Because we've now identified it's export controlled, for example, right? So I think, as CMMC, becomes official, I think some of the government's training will also evolve and it will help the process. But I think it's been very challenging, to get clarity so far. And I'm hoping that, that'll improve. So, the whole reason for having Night Shield, as you started off, is just to quickly get them compliant so they can move on and do what it is that they do.
Right.
UCF is quite large. We have, just under 70,000 students, I think, this past year. We kind of rivaled back and forth of being, number one or number two in terms of student population, and about 10,000 employees and multiple campuses. So, that's a lot. And, we're not
the city that I grew up in here in Indiana. Yeah. Wow.
So, it's a lot to, I guess, assume, that as a business, you can affect all your employees. But as a university with also that volume of students, right, we want to be secure, but there's also, limits of when it's overkill or too much for doing that. That's right. It's not feasible and it's costly. So, having this enclave, allows them to quickly, reach compliance without worrying that, we've overburdened other aspects of their job, like teaching, right?
Right. That's important to point out. And also you mentioned with the contracting officers, to that point, a lot of them, they don't know it either. So they have to say, okay, ask them. They're going to point you. It's like going in the circle. Go, hey, look at the regulations.
Well, it was interesting in the, the proposed final rule, that we saw how much emphasis they put on program managers. And I actually thought it was a good thing because the contract officer knows the regulatory side, but they don't really deal with the content, right? They don't know whether it's CUI or not CUI until context has been, provided to them by the program manager. So hopefully that will evoke some training, right, on the government side too, so that we can all be working together. We have often found when we don't have clarity and we reach out like, hey, can we just have a meeting? Like, let us tell you what we're seeing on our side, and where the lines don't seem to meet. And, every time we found that they're like, oh yeah, we see what you're talking about, and they just didn't view it that way, So we've been able to have success in getting the clarity that we needed, but there are other cases we don't always have that, and we just have to do the best that we can.
Yeah, context can make a big difference in having a conversation. Certainly. Now, you mentioned with the researchers, like meeting with them early and often, like from a practical standpoint, especially for universities at large, like how have your team approached doing that and really accomplishing?
So each time that we, identify a project, a new award, right, and that happens through the ancillary review process. So, we have certain terms and regulations that if anyone in the sponsored programs office is, reviewing and they see any of these, it causes that contract to come over to my team for a review. So that's how we're able to quickly flag these awards and identify them as being involved with CUI, for example. So immediately when we see that, we're already reaching out to the PI saying, hey, we identified your project has these requirements and, let's have a kickoff meeting kind of thing, right? So we use that as the opportunity to learn about their project so we can identify, will a VDI work, right? Maybe they're just writing some reports or viewing some information, and we could let them do that in a VDI. But if they have specialized compute needs or, visualization, or it's something special for testing that they're doing in their environment, then we need to quickly get that system onboarded and joined to the Night Shield domain so that we can push out that secure configuration to them. So that meeting is learning about their project, and then it's also kind of training and, sharing with them some of the requirements. We then also help them put together what we call a research project system security plan. So we maintain an overall plan for the enclave, an SSP for the enclave, but the aspects of the project that are unique, the physical controls, the systems unique to what they're doing, who they're collaborating with, those are all documented in a research project system security plan. So we go over that with them as well. And we also introduce them. They have a new IT team, right? So the support team of Night Shield basically becomes their tech support. We work closely with their departmental IT, so that we can do any handoffs for onboarding that physical system. But we take care of that in that meeting as well. And if they're a repeat PI, somebody that we've already worked with, we don't have to go over as much in the beginning, but we still have the meeting about the project because that's kind of our intake for us to, we can read the statement of work, but it's not the same as having a conversation of what they actually plan to do, what room they're going to be in, how they're going to move data around, and again, our focus is how can we reduce the scope. So if there's, not that we want to not be compliant, but there are shared pieces of equipment that we want to try to eliminate from being part of the enclave where we can do that. So we always try to ask, where are you getting the data? What kind of data is it? If it's non-contextualized, it's just a temperature reading or it's, just something innocuous and there's no other details, around that, then those are all good indicators that, you're just performing a test like you perform any other static test. And we don't have to bring that equipment into the fold for the project, but we still document that it's being used.
Okay. Wow. All right. Sounds like Night Shield provides that white glove cybersecurity compliance service to
that's a good way of
investigators. I like it. Yeah. And having spoke to several security professionals at various universities, it seems like the ones that are successful at doing this are really taking that similar approach, understanding that the researchers, they have competing priorities and cybersecurity is not top on their list or their expertise. So as far as the security team has to make that process as seamless, smooth as possible for them. Can't do everything. To your point you mentioned earlier about the physical security, they have to do that themselves for the most part. But as far as being able to identify the solutions, the tech, giving them, I love that y'all providing their IT teams to support them. Yeah, that makes a big difference, and it creates that collaborative type of relationship versus having them start from scratch and hey, these are the requirements. Good luck. You're on your own. That's not going to work.
Yeah, they want to meet the requirements, but they don't want to have our job, right?
Right.
They really don't want to learn all of the details. And so we have to try to make it as simple as possible. Unfortunately, I feel a lot of this is kind of like this. It's just, well, if you're doing this, then and so we have to try to simplify it in their situation for that project. What is it that they minimally need to accomplish?
I like it. I spoke with Will Drake from Indiana University, and he mentioned their approach with research is essentially to bake the cybersecurity in. So the researchers don't have to really worry about that part. Just what are you trying to do? What data are you collecting? What it entails? All right, we'll match it with the secure solutions.
That's a great way of phrasing that because we don't want them to think about all of it either. That's why, the enclave exists and, we're able to support both on-prem and VDI and cloud compute and all things in between, right, that might come about. But they do have to know certain things because it is a different environment. And there are expectations for the PI and for the team to continue to maintain that compliance, right, for the handling of the data and that sort of thing. But I hope that we're getting to be better at conveying that message, as we go along. I think the more you do it, the more opportunities you have for streamlining your documents and your guidelines and putting a lot of focus on that to make it easier.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm sure your PIs are appreciative. Definitely. It's a lot. It's a heavy lift. So that team approach is certainly the team sport.
Absolutely. Well, we don't have a huge team, believe it or not.
Not surprising with the university. It's a small team.
Yeah, I do hear others, in higher ed, and we probably have a few more than some of them, but we still don't have a large team. So, part of that streamlining is always, looking at how can we take advantage of enterprise data? How can we integrate with, other systems to support the tracking of training or background, personnel screening, background checks?
Right.
How can we be informed about terminations or other staffing events that may affect a researcher's account being in this separate enclave, which is not being terminated automatically when they leave the university because it's a separate environment from the university's enterprise domain. So how do we get integrated and in the loop? We've done a lot of those types of initiatives so that we can take advantage of that data and get those reports. Who's charging a project, right? So if it's a CUI project and we've tagged it that way, well, who's charging on that project? And did they route through our team for verification of training and screening and that sort of things? We need alerts on that because we don't have time to do the manual reviews, to identify it. And sometimes the PI didn't remember I forgot to tell you I had so-and-so. Okay, well, where are they doing their work?
I need to know that. That's important detail.
And so some of these other automations and hooks, enable us to have a small team and work smarter, right? Not harder.
Certainly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you're a small team, you really have to optimize smarter, not harder. Indeed. Now, another regulatory requirement that is on the horizon, is taking the higher ed by storm, is NSPM 33. That's one I hear a lot. What are your thoughts on where that's heading? What's going to be the impact of higher ed?
I think we were all kind of hoping with the latest, I don't know what you would call it, release, that there was going to be better guidance on the cybersecurity side. But basically they postponed that and said, well, wait, for more guidance on that area. But looking at it from the standpoint of it aligning to the same requirements for basic safeguarding, like for federal contract information, when you take a broad sweep across all other activity that the university has, like with grants, right? It's not a contract for a product or a service. It's, to go research the latest in, I'll make it up, like population of fish in a pond, things that is important for that ecosystem or what might be going on, but there's no balance of pushing these requirements out across the board of the type of research that's being done and the protections that have to be in place. So when I mentioned earlier, sometimes we have undergraduates doing research and they have their own system, a personal system. It's not a university issued one. So now we're going to have to keep, asking, well, wait a minute, you now have to have a university issued system, maybe in some cases for us to attest that all of those basic safeguarding requirements are being met. Are you patching your system? Are you running AV, antivirus or anti-malware? We can't really attest to that when it's a personal system, right? Unless there's some sort of arrangement that's been worked out for using Intune or something perhaps to help manage it. But I don't think the university really wants to go down that path, right? So there's going to be some cost associated with acquiring systems perhaps where there aren't any. So, I think we were kind of anxiously awaiting how that was going to unfold and what it really would entail for agreements at large.
Determined. Now, let's wrap up this interview. You've given us a lot of great information. Obviously, have had a long, accomplished career. So you're just getting started. You have much more you're going to accomplish. What's something that you wish you knew earlier in your career when you first started that you know now? Beneficial. I know hindsight is always 20/20.
Well, ironically, I thought I wanted to be a CPA. I went to school for accounting, so when I first started all of this, I really just wanted to learn more about computers. And that's ultimately what led me to, taking a job at the university to develop databases, which at the time I had no idea what that even meant. There was had to be more to computers than spreadsheets, which I was getting really adept at building. But somebody was willing to teach and I was willing to learn. And so back then I was just kind of seeing how the use of computers was evolving, and I knew I needed to be in that space, but I had no idea where that would lead. I honestly thought achieving something like being in the C-suite was out of the realm of possibility. But I guess I would say maybe to my younger self or to those that are just starting, push hard and, get involved in anything that interests you, because if you have passion and you have interest in that area, who knows where it's going to lead. So I can't say it's one specific thing. It's just, I'm really grateful for the career opportunities I've had at the university, being a PI and working with so many in DOD, many of them became friends over the years because you work hand in hand with them day in and day out. I learned from them and evolved professional, right, of kind of what was expected in this space and what to do. But I never in my younger self would have thought this would be where my career would lead. So
I love that, where you say someone was willing to teach you and you're willing to learn. That really is the key, my key takeaway. And then also with being a CPA, there's still a lot of overlap within cybersecurity, though, that skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. The funny thing about the way that I actually got my initial job at the university is I took an MIS course, Management Information Systems course, as an elective, as a way I thought, hey, it'd be a good way to kind of learn something about computers beyond what I was doing in accounting. And it was at the end of that course that the adjunct professor said he was hiring, students to come and develop databases and no experience was needed. And I was like, well, that sounds really fascinating. But I found out that he actually reached out to a few other people in the class that I was friends with and asked if they were interested. And it really bothered me that he had not contacted me. And, that was probably a really key moment, in my young self of having the confidence to call him and say, how come you didn't reach out to me? And he said, well, I overheard you talking in class that you had a job and, you were already employed. And I'm like, well, who said I can't do more than one thing? And he said, oh, okay. And I said, look, you said you were willing to teach and I'm willing to learn. And so ultimately that's how, he's like, well, come on over. So I stayed, and many of the others ended up moving on in their career. They found this wasn't something that they wanted to do, but I was just fascinated. And I studied more for my job than I did for any course that I ever took.
Right. Awesome. That's invaluable advice to people in any stage of their career. Just take that initiative. Be willing
Absolutely.
to put yourself out there, have that self-confidence. And to your point, where if you're going to demonstrate that passion and interest, there'll always be people that's willing to teach you and help you.
That's right.
Take that first step. Awesome. Well, Tammie, one last question I have for you. What is a book, movie, podcast, or mentor that has had a profound impact on your career, or personally or professionally?
Well, certainly that adjunct professor that hired me, he was a tremendous mentor to me. He pushed me to ends that I didn't think I could achieve.
Stretched you, huh?
Yeah, he sure did. But, it allowed me to learn things by doing. And sometimes when you're given the answers, you don't appreciate the process. So he forced me to go through the process of learning something that I wasn't educated in from an academic standpoint, right? So designing systems, for example, is not something that I went to school for, right? I just told you I started out in accounting, but he pushed me to learn aspects that I wouldn't have probably uncovered if he had just told me the answer. So I really do owe a lot to him for the time that he spent pulling me and pushing me along. I'd say a book, I really am not one, honestly, to read a lot for pleasure. I read to learn something that I'm specifically interested in. And, so long time ago, trying to learn about retirement and, how to retire young, those sorts of things. I read a book called The Automatic Millionaire. One of the statements that was in it that always stuck with me was to pay yourself first. So if you think about whether you have an hourly job or you're salaried, the first hour of every day is for you. So putting away that money, saving it, or it's for you. It's not for your employer. So pay yourself first and think about that and set things up to be automatic, right? Because if you leave it to your own timing, you are less likely to do it because life is busy and you get distracted. So I liked the concepts that were in that book.
I like that as well. Do you remember the professor's name?
Oh, absolutely. Because we became very good friends. Robert Reed.
Robert Reed. Awesome. Yeah. All of us have those mentors in our life, whether formally or informally, have made a great impact. Nice. Well, Tammie, appreciate your time today. You've been very generous with your time and knowledge. Special thanks to Wendy Effley for recommending you, putting us in contact. I definitely learned a lot. And I'm sure when we share this podcast episode that the audience will as well. Before I let you go, do you have any closing remarks or advice for information security professionals in higher ed who are trying to navigate cybersecurity compliance, CMMC, and SPM 33, all of the acronyms that they're facing?
I'd say the best advice is we're in it together. I really do learn a lot from others and their experiences. So we'll just keep working on it together.